All right, so in the last lesson, we went about setting up our project, making sure that we incorporated our tweet sentiment analysis classifier as well as this external framework called Swifter. So we're now all ready to go. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our viewcontroller.swift file and we're going to import that framework that we included in the last lesson, and that's Swifter iOS. Now, the next thing to do is to check the documentation for this Swifter framework. And you can see that under usage, we've already done installation, so we now need to use it. And it tells us that it can be used using 3 different kinds of authentication protocols that Twitter allows. And you can specify which one you want to use. And they give you the example code for how you would do that. Now you can see over here under our app, we've got a consumer API key. And if you click on this link where it says manage keys and access tokens, then it takes you to an area where you've got your API key and your API secret. And that's everything that you need to do in order to authenticate yourself as a developer to try and grab data from the Twitter API. So if we head back over here, you can see the one where we have a consumer secret as well as a consumer key is the second one. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this line of code, and we're going to go ahead and paste it just under our IB outlets. Now I have to add a let here so that we create a new constant called Swifter, and it's going to be initialized using a consumer key and consumer secret. So we have to replace these 2 placeholders with our actual values from the Twitter app. So if you head over to your Twitter application manager, remember this is under apps.twitter.com, and there you have to log in into the account that you used to set up your Twitter application. And then following what we did before, going to keys and access tokens, you should be able to have a consumer key. This is your API key, which you are going to paste in here as a string. So remember to enclose it inside some quotation marks, and also make sure there's no spaces between the beginning and the end and the quotation marks. And secondly, we're going to copy our consumer secret. Now notice it's actually quite long, so just double click and we're going to copy it over here, again inside some quotation marks. So now this line of code will use Swifter to initialize a new instance of this framework, and it's going to authenticate ourselves with the Twitter servers using our API key and API secret. Now at this stage and previously, some of you guys might have wondered, well, if we have our API keys inside here and we upload our app to GitHub, isn't that kind of dangerous? And you're absolutely right. Having API keys, especially ones you have to pay for. So for example, currently on the Twitter app, this is using standard access. So we're not paying and we're not giving any of our payment details so that international students who have issues using credit cards in the US or don't actually have a credit card, then you can still learn along with all of the lessons. So I try to avoid using any services in my tutorials that requires a credit card sign up. But at some point you might need to use a higher access level tier, such as their premium tier, where you can make more queries to their servers per minute and you can get back more data from the Twitter servers as well. So at that stage, then your API key and your API secret is directly linked to your credit card. So that means that if somebody steals it and they use it in their app and they use up all of your credits, then you're not going to be very happy. So in those cases, you have to make sure that these API keys are not uploaded to GitHub. There are a lot of people who crawl through GitHub projects looking for these API keys and using them, especially things like AWS keys. It's very, very precious, and you have to make sure that you keep this secret. Now, the simplest way of doing that is to simply create a new plist file by going to File, New, File, and under the iOS tab, we create a new property list file. And this secrets.plist can have your API key. So this will be API key, and then you put in the string value, obviously here, and then you add another one, that's the API secret, and then you add the string value here. And as we described inside the GitHub module, you would add this secrets.plist to the git ignore list so that it does not get uploaded to GitHub. And this is probably one of the most frequently used ways for iOS developers to obfuscate their secrets, such as API keys and API secrets. Now, some of you might be wondering, once my app is on the App Store, and somebody gets a hold of the actual IPA file or the actual app software, and they download it and they try to butcher it and they try to dissect it, will they be able to find my API key? Yes, that is in fact the case. And in the course resources list, I link to a Stack Overflow answer that's really quite exhaustive on this topic. In fact, you'll find that it's actually very, very difficult to keep your secure keys completely secure if you have an iOS app, just because people are able to download the app and you need the keys to be accessible at the stage when the app is run. So this is a good link to have a read about if you are really worried about this topic, but in most cases, it's sufficient to simply use a secrets.plist file and keep it off GitHub. All right, so now that we've got our Swifter authentication set up, the next thing to do is to use Swifter and to search for tweets on Twitter. Now, unfortunately, if you have a look at the documentation for Swifter, it's not very exhaustive. It tells you about how you can get the home timeline and how you can get user follower IDs, get list subscribers. But there's actually a lot more methods that it can do, and they're not all listed over here. So how can we figure out what it can do? Well, if we go inside View.did.load and we tap into our Swifter object and we hit dot, now we can access all of the methods that are available and automatically suggested to us that Swifter can perform. So if we scroll through this list, you can see we've got add list member, authorize, block user, check list membership, create list, delete list, destroy direct messages, favorite tweet, follow user. And you can see that these methods are pretty self-explanatory. They're very well named, and you should be able to understand exactly what it does just by reading the method name, which is always a good sign of good naming conventions, right? So remember that when you're naming your own methods, to follow this kind of style where it should be really obvious to anybody reading it, even without any documentation, what the method does. Now, in our case, the method that we need, this is a very long list because we can use Swifter to do a lot of things, such as get the IDs of the followers of the user, get user suggestions, list tweets, look up friendships, loads and loads of things. But the one that we want is something called search tweet. So if we scroll down to this area around the S level, you can see that we've got search tweet using a string and giving a failure handler, or we can have the really exhaustive one, which is search tweet using loads of things. And that's the one that I'm going to choose. So let's go ahead and hit enter to get it to automatically insert this gigantic method call. Now, don't worry about how many parameters this method call has, because we're not going to be using many of them, and we'll get rid of some of the ones that we don't need. Now, as you know from before, when you hold down the option key and your question mark comes up when you hover over, say, a method or an object. So for the object, I can click on it and I can see what is its type, or what is its class, essentially. And for the methods, I can click on it and it gives me the declaration, the summary, as well as a discussion and all of the parameters that are available. Now, this discussion part actually comes from the Twitter APIs. So if you have a look on the Twitter developer docs, again, this is a link inside the course resources list so that you can navigate to it easily. You can see that there's a section called Standard Search API, which is what we have access to by not paying Twitter anything. And here, you can see that there is a detailed reference of the Search API endpoints. So let's head over there. And here is a whole bunch of information of essentially how this method works. And this is where this part comes from. As you can see here, returns a collection of relevant tweets matching a specified query, returns a collection of relevant tweets matching a specific query. So this is the page that we're going to be referring to when we are using this particular Swifter method. Now, if you look at all of these parameters and you're wondering what each of them do, then have no fear, because they are all listed in a really neat table and they're all explained extensively about what they are for, how you use it, what they are expecting. So let's go through some of these options. The only parameters that are required is the one that is using, which is search tweet using. So this is your query string, right? So if you wanted to search for tweets that were at Apple, then that's what you would put in here effectively. You would replace the placeholder with a string that's at Apple. Then you'll be searching for tweets that contain this handle. So this is your search query. And of course, if you're going to search for tweets, this has to exist. So this is obligatory. The other two that you need to have in there is what to do when you get a successful response and what to do when you get a failure response back from the Twitter servers. You need to handle those. And all of the rest of these other ones, these other parameters, they're all optional. And you can see that because they listed in this table here. You can see whether if it's required, this is column. And the search query is of course required. Geocode is optional, language is optional, locale is optional. All of these are optional other than this parameter using, which is the same as the Q parameter over here. And the other one is success and failure. So let's go ahead and delete all of these other parameters and only keep what is strictly necessary. Okay, so next thing we need to handle is what to do when the search was successful and we get a successful response from the Twitter servers. Well, if you click on this particular placeholder, make it turn blue and hit enter, and it'll automatically insert our callback closure over here. And these are the two objects that we're going to get back upon a successful query. And the first object is the actual set of results of tweets. And the second object is the metadata around our search. So how long did the search take? Was it successful, etc. So we're going to name these two JSONs results and metadata. And then inside this part for the code placeholder is where we're going to print out our results, just so that we can test it and see that everything's working as expected. The next one is to handle the failure scenario. So let's click on the Swifter failure handler and again hit enter to automatically insert the callback. And the error, we're just going to call error. And inside the code placeholder, I'm going to delete that and instead replace it with print. And we're going to say there was an error with the Twitter API request. And then we're going to include that error in there. So if there was an error with making a request to the Twitter servers, for example, if we had our consumer key wrong or we didn't include a consumer key and consumer secret, then our authentication would fail and we would get an error back from the Twitter servers saying something like 403 not authenticated, and we'll get this printed down here in our debug console and we can use it to figure out what went wrong. Now, if it was successful, however, we would be inside this area printing the results that we got back that matches our particular search query. So all the tweets that contain the handle at Apple. So now this is the very simplest way of searching for tweets through the Twitter API. So let's give this a go, and I'm just going to go ahead and click run so that when our view controller, our initial view controller, gets loaded up, then all of this code gets carried out, and we should be able to see either a set of JSON results or an error in our debug console. All right, so there goes our app. It currently doesn't do anything, but if we look in our debug console, you can see there's loads and loads of information that came back. So we can presume that it was pretty successful, because if there was an error, it would be much shorter than this. So let's go ahead and click in here and hit Command A to select all, and then Command C to copy all of it. And we're going to go onto Chrome, and we're going to find ourselves a JSON editor. So I'm going to go over to jasoneditoronline.org, and I'm going to paste everything that I had from my debug console. Now remember that there's a part of the debug console that has all of these messages from Xcode, and this is of course not a part of the JSON, and so we're going to delete all of those parts, and starting at that square bracket and ending at a closing square bracket should be everything that is our JSON. So let's go ahead and click the right arrow to turn it into a format that is much more human readable. And you can see that we've got an array of 15 items back from the Twitter server. And if we check the first item, you can see it's got a whole bunch of properties, such as the source. So this is what was the application that was used to make this tweet, what was the date that it was created at, what was the location that it was created at, was it favorited or not? What was the text of the actual tweet? How many times has it been retweeted? What's the language it's in? Was it in reply? And you can see there's like loads and loads of pieces of data that's associated with this single tweet. But the part that we're interested in is actually just the text of the tweet, because that's what we're going to be using to perform sentiment analysis on. So that's what we'll be trying to retrieve from our JSON once we get it up and running.